Kneeling beside his sister, Will reflected that Rowan's ideas always sounded good right up until he realized they weren't going to work. A stand of brush concealed them from the gardens and houses of the hamlet of Wildrum, which nestled in a picturesque dale surrounded by hills. Castle Ardenvale was an hour's walk away, not so far, but hidden from view by the stony bulk of Giant's Jaw Hill. The trampled fields looked bleak under the midday sun. What should have been healthy stalks of ripened wheat and barley awaiting harvest lay snapped and withered on the ground, streaked with patches of dried blood. Will shuddered, thinking of the poor farmer who had been dragged bleeding across the fields by redcaps. Nasty creatures. "I've changed my mind," he whispered. "You can't really be suggesting we hike over Choking Drum." He nodded toward the ridge that ran between Giant's Jaw Hill and distant Crown Crag. Choking Drum formed a physical barrier between the tiny dale and the wide lowlands of Ardenvale proper. Trees grew densely along the slope and crest of the ridge. Even from down here, he could feel the animosity of a place that held a pulse of its own. A stubborn remnant of the wilds grown along the ridge, the combined efforts of the castle denizens and the hardy farmers of Wildrum hadn't managed to eradicate it. "It's not that wide," said Rowan with her usual pompous need to over-explain. She was a lot like their father. "Titus can easily shoot an arrow over that bit of forest. We just have to race through and get to the top." "Is it just me who sees trampled fields and blood?" "Redcaps never stick around. They're fickle and craven. Anyway, you heard what the chatelaine said. There's been a new incursion in Westling Village, a half-day's ride west. No one near here. The far slope of the ridge is clear of wilds-touched forest. Once we reach the crest, it's an easy walk down to Beckbarrow. You remember? Last year we hiked from Beckbarrow up Crown Crag to see the old battle site." "Yes, with Carice, Titus, and 14 others, including 3 knights. And yet, when I look round, I see you and me. Can you count?" "I'll go alone. I'll tell Carice and Titus you got sick with nerves and stayed at the castle." She got to her feet, adjusted her sword where her belt had gotten twisted, and dashed over to a thorny hedge that acted as first line of defense between Wildrum and the trees. Using the hedge as cover, she jogged toward the ridge. Will pressed fingers to his eyes. He'd known something like this would happen. Will didn't like disobeying his parents because it upset them. He loved them too much to hurt them. His easy acquiescence made everyone think he was the obedient twin, while Rowan was the headstrong, insubordinate one. The misapprehension gave him a lot of space to do what he wanted, which was to seek out secrets he could someday trade to the mirror at Castle Vantress in the hope of winning knighthood there. At Vantress, he could study and learn to his heart's content. He could go exploring without his parents always looking over his shoulder and questioning his every move to make sure he was above reproach. It was so annoying, and it wasn't as if he and Rowan had ever been actual troublemakers. They just wanted some space to make their own choices. So why not? Rowan had been right about their mother. She could have given the Queen's lecture herself. After 2 days, it was probable the Redcaps had moved on. Redcap burrows within the borders of the realm had been burnt out before he was born, and because they were hunted ruthlessly when they ventured out of the wilds, they never stayed in the realm for long. Anyway, he'd always wanted to set foot in the wilds, see what was there, learn a few of its secrets. Cutting through a narrow strip of the wilds was as safe a way as any to get his feet wet. No one need ever know. His adventure wasn't such a bad idea after all. He trotted after Rowan, catching up as she reached the edge of the forest. It sprang up in an abrupt line where the ridge began to slope more steeply. She had halted to stare in consternation at the vegetation. The trees created an impenetrable wall interwoven with rose brambles and woody vines. Will touch the hilt of his sword. Are you suggesting we cut our way in? She caught her breath. A line of moss-covered stairs appeared, climbing the slope within a tunnel made by overhanging trees and arcing brambles. The figure of a person astride a magnificent elk descended the stairs. The rider's pale hood concealed its face. The elk seemed made of mist, drifting toward lower ground. Its huge wings and impressive spread of antlers interpenetrated the tangle of trees, making it more ghost than substance. A shiver of awe and terror crawled through his flesh. He drew his sword. Rowan whispered, "Archons can't be killed by ordinary weapons." "I know," he whispered back, tightening his hand on his sword's hilt. The Archon dissolved into the shadows, there and then gone. But the stairs remained, a lure, a promise, or a trap. The heat of adrenaline flashed through him, and then subsided as Rowan muttered something angry and determined under her breath and started up the stairs. She hadn't gone up 5 steps before her form faded from view, as the gloom beneath the trees swallowed her. Keeping his sword unsheathed, he hurried after. The stone steps were slippery with moss and lichen, a throat-squeezing dampness, like 100 invisible cold hands pressed against him. When he glanced back, he could no longer see the dale, only a shrinking oval of light. Hey, wait up, Ro!" his void echoed, blown back at him from amid the trees. "Ro, Ro, Ro." Her leaf-green cape billowed, or maybe that was wind blowing branches across the stairs. Had he lost sight of her? A glimmer flashed. She'd drawn her sword. He put on a burst of speed, but stumbled as the steps flattened into a dim open space, carpeted with woody vines as thick as his legs. They reminded him of sleeping snakes. He stopped. What if they were really snakes? Snakes that could wrap you tight in their massive coils and choke the life out of you. Snakes that could turn into smoke and choke you by filling up your lungs through your nose and mouth. Wasn't that why this ridge was called Choking Drum? Why all the knights and farmers of Ardenvale had never been able to clear this serpent-infested ground? A slow hiss teased his ears, where the vines started to slither. "Will? Is that you?" Rowan said in a low voice. She stood in the open space, which wasn't a clearing because there was no sign of sky, even though the sun stood at its zenith and should have been spearing light down onto the forest loom. The vines weren't moving. It was just the trick of the eyes. He walked over to her, careful not to step on any of the eerie vines twisted along the ground. With each step, he felt he was cracking objects underfoot, as if walking on a carpet of tiny bones. Trees loomed on all sides, bending in to embrace their hapless prisoners. "This has to be the crest," she muttered. "We should have reached the other side by now. Can you see a path out there?" The forest was dead silent, not even the birds singing. A smell drifted on the breeze, so rank it made his eyes water. He blinked back the tears. A branch snapped. Rowan spun, blade slashing. A waist-high figure screamed in agony and fell sideways. The hot scent of fresh blood flooded over Will's senses, holding him in place like a spell. "Behind you!" Rowan shouted. He whirled, blocking with his sword. A crude blade thunked against steel. A gray, leathery-skinned redcap chittered at him, teeth white in the gloom, hair matted with a crust of blood so stiff it was like a helmet. Though its head barely came to his chest, it attacked again, fearless and vicious, as it pressed him back. He tripped backward over a vine and landed clumsily on his back, his blade wrenched from his hand. It shrieked as it leaped. He kicked up to catch it on the chest and sent it reeling backward. A staggeringly brilliant crackle of lightning enveloped it, and it fell. "Breathe! Breathe!" He fumbled around and finally found his fallen sword, just as Rowan stabbed the redcap through the abdomen. Its scream of pain cut the air like a clarion call. Redcaps never went anywhere just in pairs. More would come, and swiftly. Shadows moved off to their right, where the stairs had been. 4 more were sneaking up on Rowan as she looked the other way, hearing something moving in the trees to the left. Will flung a net of ice at the ones about to swarm Rowan. By itself, the ice couldn't hurt them, but the cold slowed them down. She cast bursts of lightning into the sluggish bodies of the 4, trying to mob her. The ice amplified the lightning charge. They jerked and quivered, mouths open in silent screams. As the brightness faded, they crashed to the ground. Rowan's magic sizzled out. As she bent over, panting from exertion and surprise, one fallen redcap stirred. Dragging itself on its forearms, it crawled toward Will, hissing. Sharpened teeth glimmered like waiting knives. He scrambled up, sword in hand. The injured redcap lunged at him. All the years in training rushed back into his head. Use the shoulder, velocity, edge, focus, follow through. He slashed it deep across the chest, and as it tumbled, finished it with a cut down onto its exposed neck. It collapsed and lay unmoving. He and his sister stood back to back, breathing hard, surrounded by 6 dead redcaps. Vines rustled, curling around the bodies to engulf them. A gust of wind stung their faces with a gritty shower that tasted of blood. Will reflexively shut his eyes and covered his mouth and nose. The treetops rattled. The wind died. When he opened his eyes, it was dim in the ordinary way of heavy forest cover. A hazy glamour of summer sunlight shone beyond the tangled growth of vine-wrapped trees and shrubs blooming with blood-red mothflowers. They were standing about 50 paces from the edge of the forest, on the crest of the ridge, so close to safety. Rowan pressed a hand to her forehead. Did that happen, or did we dream it? Hush! A chitter-chitter of red-capped voices rose out of the silence. More were coming. Many, many more. Branches swayed as something very large and weirdly quiet moved in the thick brush. Through the leaves, Will glimpsed a helmet. What is that? Rowan's eyes went wide as the creature kept closer. Huge shoulders covered in a monstrously large cloak, the glint of a massive axe. Is it a man? Is it a giant? Will grabbed her arm. Is it Ro? Shut up and run!